get a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now.
Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it.
Performing an evasive maneuver.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through all the mistakes, failures, and explosions that made modern space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn, he, him.
Chris, he, him.
And a Herod quiz. He, him.
A Herod quiz.
I can't even say my own name right.
The mood's a little down for everybody because today we are picking back up our series on Mittelwerk, the Nazi concentration camp that made Hitler's vengeance weapons.
Turns out being the first at something is not the best at,
Yeah.
best for humanity. Shocker.
In part one, we focused on the early history of the Nazi military rocket program, how a collection of amateur rocket nerds like Wernher von Braun were headhunted by Walter Dornberger to join the Army's rocket program, how they established the world's first real rocket test site at Peenemunde, and how by 1942, the A4 missile they were developing had weathered Nazi bureaucracy and backstabbing to gain Hitler's full support. That episode is not necessarily critical to understanding what happens in this one, but I would still recommend giving it a listen.
It helps lay the foundation.
Yeah, the entire early history, like something that we are also going to be covering in this episode is, like the entire early history of the V2 program is success brings unwanted attention. That's kind of all of a big chunk of part one. Now, as also discussed in part one, we do have a standing heavy content warning for this series, but I also said that I would be giving people heads up of when it gets worse in the episodes. While this episode is still going to be the lead up to Mittelwerk proper, we are not going, like, this is mostly talking still about Peenemunde. We are going to be talking about the use of slave labor and a lot of people dying. If that is something you don't want to hear about on your rocket history podcast, I would recommend skipping this one. And it is only going to get worse from here.
If you tripped into this after the start, this is the wave off approach.
Yeah. And we chatted about this before the recording. I don't want to overdo this. I don't want to seem like I'm milking this and trying to play the awfulness of it up. But we do want to give people fair warning as we go in, because we are going to be talking about concentration camps, genocide, and all of that tied into a rocket that is the genesis of almost every launch vehicle and a lot of missiles that we see today. Also going to be talking about a lot of people who didn't get punished for this atrocity, but instead got rewarded.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, off to a wonderful start so far. Another thing I want to note for historical accuracy and my own pedantry, in part one, I kind of went back and forth between the two, but from here on out, I am not going to use A4 and V2 interchangeably, especially because the difference factors into today's episode. While they may be the exact same design, the A4 was an army project that competed for resources with hundreds of other projects in Germany's straining war economy. The V2, meanwhile, was a wonder weapon that awed Hitler, and he bet his entire Reich on it. Unwisely, thankfully for history.
It's still weird hearing someone get rocket pilled before Khrushchev.
Yeah, and
not full on rocket pilled, but someone got their car salesman foot in the door.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily want to do the math on it, of lives taken versus lives lost, especially while we are talking about Mittelwerk.
Oh, I'm not even. I
don't want to
get into that calculus.
I wasn't saying that you went there. I was saying that the V2 as a weapon, as a weapon compared to the resources that are poured into it, is an abject failure. The Nazis would have been significantly more equipped to fight the war if they had spent all of this Wunderwaffe, this super weapon resources, funding, personnel on just kind of standard war materiel. But that's kind of getting into more of like the Hitler psychology of it. And an eventual series we will be doing on the V2 itself as a weapon. Yeah, I don't want to get too bogged down in that. So part 1 of the series has a full accounting and reasoning behind the sources I picked for the entire series, if that interests anyone. For this part specifically, because we are not getting to Mittelwerk itself yet, I mostly used The Rocket and the Reich by historian Michael Neufeld and V2, A Combat History by T.D. Dungan. As always, all links will be down below in the show notes.
The concern of the German people.
That sounds like a sentence that turns into something fucking scoffed.
It will be. We get there.
Understood.
Now, in the last episode, we covered the conception of the program that would become the V2, the earliest iterations of German military rockets, and the establishment of the Peenemunde Army Research Center, a colossal base dedicated entirely to turning rockets into weapons. And despite a lot of the Nazi reputation for diving headfirst into fantastical superweapons, this was a very hard-fought battle for the scientists like Wernher von Braun and military officers like Walter Dornberger. And most of this was to do with Nazi party politics. Over the course of its history, the aggregate program rose and fell pretty much at the whim of however Hitler was feeling that day. Early on, he saw it as a frivolous waste of resources, stealing steel from U-boat production and chemists and PhDs from where they belonged, frontline infantry units. I have a note here to compare it to the Uran Battalion, the Roscosmos mercenary group.
I was literally just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Congrats on your PhD. Pick up this AK and get in the car.
History doesn't repeat, it echoes.
And this is one of the few times I can say I agree with Hitler and think he should have done more. I think he should have put more of Germany's scientific, their best and brightest minds on the Eastern Front. They should be in Stalingrad.
They need those folded brains to solve those problems out there.
Don't worry, stuff your brain folds into the shredder. It's right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Hop in.
Think about it. Soviet Union, Stalingrad, cold, folded brain, you can fit more brain in there. It stays warmer longer. Hitler just is saying this, while pointing at his own temples, saying this to Dornberger of just why was Wernher von Braun killed at the Battle of Kursk?
He had the folds. He didn't use them.
Yeah.
He should have calculated the trajectory of his rifle better.
However, the fortunes of the A4 program rapidly turned in 1941 and 1942. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, spectacularly failed to crush Britain during the Battle of Britain, and sensing weakness, the army pitched Hitler on the idea that their rockets could have done much better for less cost to both weapons and personnel. Missiles also don't rely on good weather and could be fired off night or day. Even better, the main opponent and roadblock of the aggregate program, Reich munitions minister Fritz Todt, died in a plane crash. His replacement, Albert Speer, Hitler's favorite architect, was significantly more enthusiastic towards rocketry. And that's another bit of a recap of what we covered in part 1, and all of that brings us up to early 1942. Germany is more than half a year into an invasion of the Soviet Union that was supposed to be over by Christmas 1941. Hitler kicked in the door, but the whole rotten structure did not in fact collapse. Despite making rapid progress in a blitzkrieg attack, the Nazi war machine bogged down within sight of Moscow. Now, obviously, this is not Hitler's fault. It can't be. Instead, Hitler decided that it was the fault of Army Chief von Brauchitsch, abusing the man so much that he suffered from a heart attack and retired. And if you'll remember from part 1, von Brauchitsch was also the main backer and benefactor to the Peenemunde facility. Walter Dornberger, the main guy heading up the rocket program for the army, was von Brauchitsch's, he was his student. So he had a lot of sway with the army chief. He was able to get a lot of, basically his connection to the army chief was the main thing keeping the aggregate program funded and high up in army priorities.
There it is.
Yeah, and even better, from then on, and this is coincidentally the exact same day that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Hitler would personally command the German army. So he didn't just replace von Brauchitsch, he took over his job. Hitler is going to single-handedly run the army from now on because clearly
Von Brauchitsch has been fired into the sun. Rest in piss.
Yeah, so because clearly he cannot trust any of these generals. These generals, some of them told him at the start that it would be unwise to start a war.
Yeah, all those generals are just fat and gay,
Yeah.
Wait a second, where have I heard this one recently?
Standing up. Yeah, Hitler standing up in front of every single German military, general, and just saying, if you don't approve of Operation Barbarossa, get out right now. Hey, if you guys want to clap, just go ahead. No one claps.
There's a non-zero chance if he pulled that, someone would have shot themselves in the face.
Nothing bad can happen. Only good happen.
Yeah, you're looking out at the crowd and one guy just kind of clutches his heart and peels over. Keels over. Fuck.
20 synchronously crushed cyanide capsules.
Yeah, every one of my teeth.
Every tooth is replaced with a cyanide capsule.
I have 32 cyanide capsules. My mouth is a Rube Goldberg of suicide.
Having the cyanide capsule dentures and you can only drink foods while you have it equipped, right? And then he forgets one day to take it out, and then he bites.
Oh yeah, it's a water soluble cyanide capsule.
He bites down on his Hamburg steak and he's like, "Oh, I'm not supposed to eat solids."
Bites down on his Hamburg steak, shit dies immediately.
Switching out to my eating suicide dentures.
What are those? Don't worry about it. No, I'm still fixated on the time for me to go. See ya.
Tapping the biokinetics code into my chest in Morse code that causes my heart to self-destruct.
Just making the Half-Life heart stop sound and just ragdolling to the floor.
Ragdolling with the Half-Life 2 ragdoll sound. Now, A4 testing started in March 1942 with a series of static fire tests. So we've explained these in previous episodes. A static fire test is where you keep a rocket bolted in place and you just run its engines.
You cuck the rocket.
You don't let it. You do let it go to completion. It just doesn't go anywhere. The first real launch was on June 13th. The rocket lifted off and breached the sound barrier, but it then wobbled itself out of control. The first successful launch, the fourth attempt, was on October 3rd. Rocket A4-V4. And as we talk about these, A4 is the rocket. V4 doesn't refer to the Vengeance weapon names. That just means that it is the fourth rocket. It's the serial number. It is rocket 4 off of the assembly line.
Okay, that helps bring this into...
Yeah. So this specific rocket that we are talking about is A4-V4, and it is the... it flies successfully. It reaches an altitude of 85 kilometers, or about 52 miles, becoming the first man-made object to reach the thermosphere, though it doesn't reach what we would technically define as space. While the next 6 or so tests would all be failures, the successful flight still convinced Nazi leadership that the rocket had promise, which became a big problem for von Braun and Dornberger. While the A4 was being put through its first test, the Royal Air Force launched a massive and sustained bombing campaign against German cities and industrial centers. And I mean massive. At the end of May 1942, more than 1,000 bombers were launched against the city of Cologne in one night. Hitler, being Hitler, flew into a rage and demanded retaliation. But after the failure of the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, he instead turned to the army. Quoting from V2, A Combat History. Hitler's lust for revenge against England was not tempered by any understanding of reality. Unbelievably, after starving the rocket program for years, Hitler suddenly demanded that, when possible, a rocket offensive against England should commence, and he wanted no less than 5,000 rockets to be launched at the outset. Dornberger was flabbergasted. So we kind of talked about this in part 1, but this is one of the hazards of being in Hitler's good graces, is that sometimes he will just randomly, he'll just point at you and say, I want 10,000 rockets ready to launch tomorrow. And this specifically ties back to something that Hitler had read in a report from Dornberger. Dornberger laid out a report that said, if we get everything we want, in 3 years, we will be able to make 5,000 rockets per year. Hitler reads this, And then later on, when he's angry, he misremembers it as Dornberger saying, we have 5,000 ready to launch right now.
He does a Trump and remembers the last fucking number
like
he heard.
The last thing that someone told him, and then he remembers it wrong, and suddenly he's saying, like, yeah, we're going to launch 10 trillion rockets on England. Dornberger told me he's got this. The plus side is that also, like Trump, he's not going to follow up. He's going to tell you to do something, and then he's going to forget about it, so you're kind of off the hook. And while he didn't follow up on his demand for 5,000 rockets, it did prompt Dornberger to start seriously thinking about how A4 combat units, how they would look. Something they hadn't really considered until then. Back at Peenemunde, the VKN, the kind of made-up military unit full of rocket scientists we talked about, they started organizing courses for normal German soldiers to eventually man these strategic missile batteries. These are the guys who are going to be actually launching the rockets. And this is also something interesting because there's a bit of a split at this point. Dornberger and von Braun, they both believe that the best way to use these A4 rockets, or they'll be V2s by the time they launch, is on mobile launch platforms. Basically, there would be like a collection of a dozen or so vehicles that would all drive out to a concrete pad, set up quickly, launch their rocket, and then scatter. And this is what winds up being the main way to use V2s. They are almost all launched from mobile launch battalions. But Hitler and Albert Speer, they have the idea, they think that these mobile rocket launch teams are going to be easy pickings for Allied aircraft. So he suggests, he gets inspired by German submarine bunkers that they have built all along the Atlantic coast. That are like heavily armored against bombers, and he decides that Germany is actually going to build a collection of rocket bunkers that would be there's a very famous example you can visit in France called the cupola, la coupole.
Oh, I know about this word.
Yeah, and like some of these bunkers are just used for storage. In the end, some of these bunkers are used for storage, and mobile launch teams come and pick up their rockets there. But the original plan is that these things are going to be actual launch bunkers. They're going to be heavily armored against Allied bombers, and then they'll have like one plan is to have basically like a V2 revolver. There will be like one launch door, and the V2s will rotate on a platform so they can like launch, rotate. And as they're rotating around, the next rockets are readied in their own chambers.
It's like an incredibly jacked up version of a VLS.
Kind of, yeah. And also just like, even when given what is for the time this like hyper futuristic weapon that has no, nothing is comparable around the world at the time. This is the first ballistic missile. Hitler still wants to make it even more impractical. He wants to build like hyper super concrete bunkers that will weather all Allied bombing. And as a side note, these bunkers, even like his inspiration, the submarine bunkers, they're armored against bombing, but the British are sending thousands of bombers against them. They break through. These bunkers get destroyed, especially once, bunker busters start being a thing.
Shout out to the Disney bomb. Oh no, if you haven't seen it,
I may have. I know that the British start using bunker busters around this time, like just dropping huge fuck off bombs on these Nazi buildings.
I can't remember like the formal name of it, but it was the air quotes Disney bomb. And it was a rocket accelerated bunker buster.
Is that purely downward velocity rocket, or is it like trying to give it more
they had to
distance?
They had to drop it from a specific altitude at a specific forward airspeed, and then something like, I don't know, 20 seconds afterwards, it would ignite a rocket that would add like an extra, I think like 100 miles an hour, just vertical velocity.
So it's not trying to get it to fly further, it's just to get it to punch in that much harder.
More energy.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool.
Oh yeah, the British had some cool shit.
It's often kind of underplayed when World War II, the Nazis get the reputation for having all of like the super advanced weaponry, but like even like radar aside, there are so many weapon developments that come about in the Allies first. I mean, I guess the the nuclear weapon is a pretty obvious big one.
I mean, you had stuff like the T-12 Cloudmaker. The bomb wasn't even supposed to hit your target. It was supposed to land like adjacent to it. then create an underground cavern that would subside into. But...
And I will tempt you by saying that we are going to talk about another one of those Allied inventions in a little bit. So by the end of 1942, there had been 9 A4 test launches with only 2 successes. Still, the production line was being tooled up to make more, and as time went on, more tests flew successfully. And those tests brought extra attention. In 1942, the Peenemunde Army Research Center played host to a surprised guest, Reichsfuhrer of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. So remember what I said about unwanted, or success bringing unwanted attention. This is the first fuck that shows up.
Hello, noted shitheel. Welcome to the party.
Yeah. Himmler had heard of the Army's missile program and wanted to see this new weapon for himself. He showed up with 1 day's notice, and while the test launch he watched was a failure, he still came away impressed with von Braun and his team's progress. When Dornberger asked, Himmler explained his visit saying, quote, "With the recent progress of your rockets, there has been much talk about it in the Führer's inner circle. Soon your work will become the concern of the German people and no longer the affairs of the Army Weapons Office or even the Army itself. The Führer is about to give your project his support, and that is why I came." So he's basically like, this is a pretty naked attempt to steal this from the Army. The fact that Hitler is giving this its support means that it is now a inner circle problem, which means that the inner circle members are going to jockey for control. He also followed this up with what was both a threat and a not-so-subtle demand that the SS be integrated into the Aggregat program. Quote, "I want to protect your work against sabotage and betrayal within your ranks." Which kind of like a very not subtle, like, hey, the nice rockets you got there sure would be awful if someone sabotaged them from within your ranks.
Yeah.
So there's actually kind of a back and forth here. The Army officers present start kind of debating this with Himmler, but in the end, he gets his way. So up until this point, Peenemünde was an Army and Luftwaffe kind of joint venture. Not involved in the V2 in any way. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, they have their own separate mini base called Peenemunde West, where they have an airfield and they are busy testing the first cruise missile. I think it's the FI-103, but you, listener, probably know it as the V1. And yeah, at first this is just a Air Force Army joint venture, but the SS gets given control of security. They set up a cordon around Peenemunde and they take over, like, all security. All guards become SS instead of Army. 10 days later, with support from Himmler and Albert Speer, Hitler finally agrees to give the A4 missile maximum priority for materiel and ordered immediate mass production of the missiles. So I know this might be a little confusing after part 1. Basically, there are a whole bunch of like tiers of priority, and all through part 1, the A4 is trying to kind of like work its way up and get, and every time they get to a new tier, they get allocated more resources, more people. They are able to order more people around, and they are able to get more just, stuff to build these missiles with. And finally, they get, right at the end of 1942, they get maximum priority from Hitler. As far as Hitler and the German war economy is concerned, the A4 is, like, right up there with, like, guns and bread. And all of this for a rocket that had flown twice successfully by that point. There had been 9 A4 test launches in 1942. There would be 35 in 1943, almost 4 times as many. So things accelerate very quickly once Hitler gives his full blessing to this program.
Truss and hide.
I don't like hearing random German
you don't
words.
like hearing a location name.
Especially in this context, oh lordy Lou.
For listener context, this is where I want to give our mid-episode content warning. Everything up to this point has been rocket development and Nazi backroom politics. What we're getting into now is the widespread use of slave labor from concentration camps, POW camps, and conscripted locals to manufacture missiles at Peenemunde.
You could say we are beginning our descent.
Yes. Now, I've seen some people wonder why the Germans would entrust something so critical to the war and so complex as a missile to slaves, people who have a lot of motivation to sabotage the missiles, and even if they aren't saboteurs, they are not going to be the best workers because they are starving and enslaved. But you need to understand that using slave labor at Peenemunde wasn't actually that unusual for 1943. If anything, Peenemunde was unusual because it was actually using non-enslaved workers up to that point. Very early into the war, Germany was conscripting concentration camp inmates and Soviet POWs to work in weapons factories. We talked last episode about how Germany was very slow to go into a total war footing, how Hitler wanted to, quote-unquote, protect the average German from the necessities of a war economy, and how Germany's weapons production actually dropped substantially once the war started. Using slaves was a stopgap measure to the Nazis, and in the context of their racial ideology, it was also a win-win. These are undesirables. They are people that the Nazis would otherwise be exterminating, but instead they could be worked to death, basically to try and wring a little bit of productivity out of them to try and keep the Nazi war machine rolling. All of this traces back to April 1942 and the appointment of Fritz Sauckel as plenipotentiary for labor allocation. This is a fancy way of saying Sauckel was in charge of organizing the slave labor that kept the German war machine moving. This includes the work camps that were part of the concentration camp network, but also the use of POWs for slave labor and the obligatory work service, a system where civilians in occupied countries were conscripted into indentured servitude. So this is something where they are not necessarily paid for.
This is get on the train, you're going to hell.
Yeah, but at least theoretically with the work service, you get to leave at a certain point. For Soviet POWs especially, and concentration camp inmates, that is not the case. Sauckel sat at the middle of this network, ensuring that the slaves made their way to the factories, and crucially that the right kind of slaves were allocated the right work. Like we said, Nazi racial ideology didn't just split people into desirable and undesirable, it ranked the undesirables and dictated what work they should be given. Jews, at least at first, were considered too untrustworthy to work on the A4 production lines. Sauckel's orders were that workers should be exploited, in his own words, to the highest degree possible at the lowest conceivable degree of expenditure. Sauckel was executed at Nuremberg in 1946, one of only 12 sentenced to die.
Good.
It's not enough.
For an extra kick in the teeth, his last words were, "God protect Germany and make Germany great again." I wish I were kidding.
You know, sometimes history really does seem to
it repeats.
Not even be a flat circle. It is a dot.
Yeah. The first prison laborers arrived at Peenemunde on June 17th, 1943. They were 200 Soviet POWs, handpicked from the Buchenwald concentration camp by the SS for their pre-war experience as technicians and mechanics. In all cases, slave workers were managed by the SS. They handled security, rations, and discipline. This being the SS, that meant that infractions were punished with torture or death, slaves were kept on starvation rations, and their first task on arriving to Peenemunde was to build their own prison, the Trossenheide concentration camp. There was also more slave labor going into the A4 outside of Peenemunde. Like any large manufacturing project, parts were farmed out to factories around Germany, like the Raderach facility in Friedrichshafen or the Raxwerk in Austria. Thousands more laborers were assigned to build V2 launching infrastructure all across Europe. Along the coast of France facing Britain, the Nazis built massive armored launch bunkers designed to protect their missiles from Allied bombers as they bombarded London. Sites included the Sottevast V2 bunker, the blockhouse at Deperlech, and the famous La Coupole in the Pas-de-Calais. For the blockhouse alone, more than 6,000 French, Dutch, and Belgian civilians were conscripted into the obligatory work service. Throughout all this, Heinrich Himmler maintained his interest in the A4 program. In January 1943, he even asked Hitler for full control of all military rocket programs, both the Luftwaffe's cruise missile and the Army's A4, though Hitler refused him. While the direct approach didn't work, Himmler kept trying to infiltrate the SS more and more into Peenemunde. The SS handled site security. They procured and fed the workers that built the missiles. Himmler lent the missile his inner circle support, and lest we forget, Wernher von Braun is at this point an officer in the SS. And while it doesn't appear that Himmler tried to use that to directly order von Braun around, it was a very clear sign that the SS intended to worm its way into every part of the A4 program until it owned the whole thing. And this is absolutely not to try and say that the V2 program was so much better when it was just the Army running things, and then the SS ruined it. This is exactly where this project was going to wind up, SS or not. Especially when it comes to slave labor and even Mittelwerk, there is nothing in the kind of decision chain that is exclusively like SS ideology. Like we talked about, using slave labor for war production was commonplace in Germany by 1943. Peenemünde was actually behind the curve on exploiting slaves. And similarly, as we'll see with Mittelwerk, basically the Germans had what they thought was a rational reason for setting up that death factory.
Operation Hydra.
My frown is getting deeper.
Yeah. I'm not saying anything because I'm too busy scowling.
On May 15th, 1942, Flight Lieutenant D.W. Steventon was flying his Spitfire home from a reconnaissance mission over the German port of Kiel. As he was flying along Germany's north coast, he noticed an airfield and a strange facility with a tower at its center surrounded by a large oval embankment. He snapped a few pictures of the site and flew on. Though he didn't know it at the time, he had just discovered the Peenemunde Army Research Center. The site with the oval hill was Prüfstand 7, or Test Stand 7, the launch pad that most A4 tests were launched from. Over the next year, several more reconnaissance flights would overfly Peenemunde and snap pictures showing rapid progress, new buildings, and the adjoining concentration camp. One flight took pictures of an A4 partially poking out of a hangar. Another caught the vapor plume of a rocket engine test. At the same time, rumors of rocket tests and mechanics being pulled out of concentration camps filtered in from Polish and French resistance groups. Even more damning was the fact that 2 German generals captured in North Africa and held in London were secretly recorded talking about some new army superweapon. They talked about initial tests at Kummersdorf and how development had been, quote, moved north. One even mentioned that Walter Dornberger had promised him that the missiles would start flying in 1943, and the captive general said that he was disappointed he couldn't hear any bangs outside his window.
You can hear one inside your window if you do something particularly stupid.
Yeah.
You should.
So basically, they have some pretty damning evidence that the German army is developing missiles. They have partial photographs of the missiles. They can see that the Germans are putting a lot of effort into this and that they are making rapid progress towards deploying them as weapons. All of this was compiled into a report given to Winston Churchill in April 1943. Unfortunately, British leadership wrote off ballistic missiles as impossible. Quote, "The memo contained many inaccuracies. For example, it proposed that the Germans were developing a multi-stage rocket capable of delivering 1,600 pounds of explosives over a range of 130 miles. Nonetheless, the bottom line was that the authors believed that a rocket weapon was probably in development. In the War Cabinet, there was much skepticism about a long-range rocket because scientific experts in Britain considered it impossible to build such a rocket. So this report is pretty much dismissed. Fortunately, this dismissal did not settle the matter, and one man, Duncan Sandys, kept digging for more information. The Undersecretary to the Ministry of Supply, Sandys was given the mission of investigating all of Germany's various superweapon programs. Basically, it was his job to dig through the rumors and sightings pouring out of occupied Europe and figure out which ones could be real weapons, which were hopeless duds, and which were just complete lies. He was also Winston Churchill's son-in-law, which probably helped him with influencing Churchill. Worried about the developments at Peenemunde, Sandys ordered more reconnaissance flights, and in June 1943, the Allies finally got their first look at a complete A4 missile, sitting out in the open at Test Stand 7, being readied for launch. Under Sandys' drive for more info, the Royal Air Force also found a string of unexplained infrastructure being built all across occupied Europe, but mostly in France and the Netherlands, opposite Britain. They found the 3 massive launch bunkers in France. They found test launch sites. They even found a strange steam catapult device. Like before, British experts looking at this evidence were wildly off on their ideas of what the A4 actually was. They thought it was multi-stage, they thought it was solid-fueled instead of liquid-fueled, and the discovery of catapult launch rays at Peenemunde convinced them that the missile needed some kind of boost before launch, either from a catapult or they would have to drop it out of a bomber. What they didn't realize is that the catapults were actually for the V1, which was being developed also at Peenemunde by the German Air Force. But inaccurate as they were, this new evidence convinced the British that the A4 was a real weapon and the Germans were serious about deploying it. At another meeting with Churchill in 1943, Sandys presented him with evidence and a final assessment by MI6 analyst R.V. Jones. The A4 was real, and it was clearly being ready to fire on Britain. Churchill was convinced and ordered countermeasures prepared. After denying the evidence of the missile for months, the War Council immediately pulled a 180 and proposed bombing Peenemunde flat. Quote, on the night of August 17th, 1943, RAF Bomber Command dispatched hundreds of bombers against the German research establishment. Codenamed Operation Hydra, the attack, using the most sophisticated bombing techniques available at the time, commenced with a full moon and no cloud cover over Peenemunde. It was a huge operation and included 596 bombers of varying types. So when Churchill orders countermeasures, he's serious about this. This is even for the time, even for the kinds of raids that the RAF is pulling off regularly into Germany, this is massive. The intent is to leave nothing standing at Peenemunde. By 1943, the British were very good at night bombing. And also, as an added note, not quite at this point in the war, but later on, the US Air Force flying out of Britain, they do day bombing. While the British, through this entire period, they become experts at night bombing. Flying ahead of the bomber fleet, Mosquito fighters dropped streams of chaff to blind German radars, then veered off to attack Berlin as a distraction, hoping to draw German interceptors away from the bomber fleet. All of the setup was perfect, and then they missed. For context, Peenemunde was set up north to south. At the north tip of the peninsula, you had the missile test site. Below that was the manufacturing facility and the design works. Then below that was a small town for German engineers and scientists. Then a POW camp for Soviet prisoners. Then the Trassenheide concentration camp. Minor note here, yes, the POWs were kept separate from the concentration camp. No treatment was not different between the two. It's more that the POW camp was still guarded by the army, whereas Trassenheide was guarded by the SS. Both of them were basically concentration camps. The first wave of bombers dropped their payload of incendiary bombs too far south, missing the missile factory completely and leveling Trassenheide and the POW camp. Between them, more than 700 inmates were killed.
Christ.
Yeah, even trying to do a good thing and wipe out this fucking missile factory.
Yeah, it turns out that when you're that widespread into some pretty horrific shit, people get dragged in against their will, and then they get leveled because, well, we have to do something about it.
So yeah, and while bombing, like, if they had actually hit the factory, they would have likely killed some slave laborers just because the factory went night and day. I need to be clear here and say that they hit the concentration camp. They missed the factory, and the bombs landed on the concentration camp.
Fuck's sake.
That same wave also destroyed most of the living quarters for German workers, though they had all made it to air raid shelters by then. Only 170 A4 personnel were killed, among them Dr. Walter Thiel, who was the lead engineer for rocket engines, and Dr. Erich Walter, head of the missile factory. As the night rolled on, the British bombers tried to shift targets to the missile works and test sites, but clouds rolled in and German defenses recovered from their initial surprise. 2 more waves of British and Canadian planes bombed the site, achieving minimal damage. 1 bomb dropped during the second wave struck a missile storage shed, destroying its contents, though these missiles were unfueled, and the roof simply collapsed. Damage was a couple of V2s were destroyed. During the third wave, a flight of bombers accidentally homed in on the exact same inaccurate target marker that the first wave had used, and bombed Trassenheide again.
Oh, great. Let's make it even.
Yeah, fucking double tap it. Fuck. Of the nearly 600 bombers launched against Peenemünde, 40 were shot down, most of them in the third wave when German defenses were at their most active. British and Canadian casualties were 290 men. Now, historians have long argued about whether or not Operation Hydra was a success, and I am not here to spend a lot of time litigating that. It clearly didn't achieve its intended goal. The rocket works at Peenemunde survived the bombing largely unscathed. Actual operational damage to the German missile program was minimal. In fact, most of it was the fact that their slave laborers were dead. The lead scientists killed in the raid weren't a huge blow because their work was largely done. The A4 wasn't on the drawing board anymore. It was flying a test a week. So, like, Walter Thiel obviously still doing work like to progress the program, but he doesn't need to design new engines. The A4 is done.
It's not like you're in a developmental role. You're now in a support role.
Yeah.
Because,
I think we compared this, in the Operation Damocles situation was similar. Like killing these German scientists working on these Egyptian rockets doesn't do anything when the rocket's already done. It would be like shooting Wernher von Braun the day after Apollo 11 launches and expecting it to, like, the moon landings to fail.
Somehow a psychic link between the two.
Yeah, if you kill the scientist in charge, the project fails. That doesn't work. They're in manufacturing. It is almost operational.
When you've hit serial production, it's kind of
you don't need R&D anymore.
Yeah, you can't just find one man, make him past tense, and then suddenly we did it. Fucking claps all around, boys. No.
Yeah. The most damage the raid had achieved was killing hundreds of slave laborers by accident. But even though the raid wasn't effective, it made it clear to Nazi leadership that the British could strike Peenemunde, and likely would keep doing so. They'd missed this first time, but what about the next raid, and the raid after that? Operation Hydra drove the German missile program underground and delayed them by what is estimated to be between 1 and 2 months. Like, this is what some historians have argued is the success of Operation Hydra. Yeah, it didn't wipe out Peenemunde. Yeah, it killed almost 1,000 innocent slaves. But it delayed the missile program, and it forced them to relocate, because Peenemunde, even if the first attack had failed, Peenemunde was now vulnerable. Operation Hydra did not lead directly one-to-one to Mittelwerk. The German military was already wary of the threat of British bombers and was in the process of spreading missile production out as thinly as possible so that if one factory was bombed, it wouldn't shut down the whole program. This is also something that was going on widely in Germany at the time. Basically, their entire industrial base was being atomized. You'd have a bunch of tiny little factories spread out. Because if you just have, like, the tank factory, the missile factory, the gun factory, those are going to get targeted bombs, and then you don't have any tanks, missiles, or guns. Plans were already in place to build underground factories that would churn out new A4 missiles. What Operation Hydra did, though, was accelerate those plans massively. Within days of the raid, Heinrich Himmler seized full control of missile production. He used the emergency around Operation Hydra as his excuse to convince Hitler, like, no, this needs to be under one guy you can trust, and that one guy is me. He declared that the only way to protect the A4 program was to move it underground, far from reconnaissance flights and bombers. He decided that they needed far more slave laborers working on the missiles, since he considered them less likely to leak secrets than civilian workers. Quote, "The urgency with which the underground rocket program was pressed forward was fostered by Himmler's mistaken belief that the threat of a missile assault on London might force the West to the negotiating table." And this is also something that Himmler kind of maintains up until the end of the war. He always holds out hope that he can negotiate with the Western allies and that, like, convince them to fight against the Soviets with him. Even right up until the end of the war, he's trying to pull this dumb scheme off.
It's okay if we're stupid enough.
Exactly.
And we piss them off enough by, bombing their shit.
Maybe, what if we deploy a terror weapon that is literally too inaccurate to be used as a weapon of war? Something that can only be used against civilians. Maybe they'll join our side.
You see the world's shittiest bottle rocket? Hear me out.
Yeah.
What if we didn't point it at you? Meanwhile, everyone in the RAF is just reloading the bomber.
Yeah, something with an accuracy radius of like 50 kilometers that can only be fired against massive cities. I know exactly what's going to make them friendly towards us.
We're going to flex and they're going to like us.
And yeah, that's Himmler being stupid. Himmler being effective is exploiting this situation, exploiting Operation Hydra to get one more project under the purview of the SS. And he had the perfect man to lead this new initiative. SS Brigade Führer Hans Kammler. Kammler, for context, is probably the most evil civil engineer in existence. He had ordered and overseen the construction of concentration camps like Auschwitz, and in late 1943, the thing that Himmler pulls him off of the job from, he is in charge of razing Warsaw, Poland to the ground in retaliation for the Warsaw Uprising. This is the guy who is going to take over V2 missile production, the guy who designed Auschwitz, the guy who buried Warsaw.
Suffering.
Yeah.
An expert in human suffering is what I'm hearing.
Since I did this with the last guy, let me look this up. Oh, he fucking disappeared. He did not face justice. He disappeared, and most people believe him to be dead by now. So yeah, he got away with it. Under Kammler's new leadership, the plan to shift missile production was accelerated from years ahead to days. Quote, Less than a week after Peenemunde had been bombed, Kammler announced plans for the Mittelwerk, or Central Works, which was the new name for the production plant at Niedersachswerfen. I guarantee you I messed that up. Niedersachswerfen. But yeah, that is the region in which Mittelwerk will be made. Operation Hydra occurred on the 18th of August, 1943. On the 28th, just 10 days later, the first inmates from the Buchenwald concentration camp arrived in the district of Nordhausen and broke ground on the Mittelwerk factory and Dora concentration camp. And that, guys, is where we are going to leave part 2 of our series on Mittelwerk, Hitler's rocket factory.
Great. We've already started with the Allies accidentally bombing a concentration camp.
Yeah.
A friendly reminder how much that war sucked.
Yeah.
That's just one instance. That's one day. That's one day out of, years.
Yeah, if you pardon my language, no shit.
Thank you to everyone who have signed up to support the show. And a big shout out to all of our top tier patrons. Our cyborg cats are Boss, Katiga Reptile, Charlie, Comrade Sleepy Bro, Daniel F, Graham E, Jesselyn T, Jorg 2, Full Frontal Matt Damon, Kamo, Lane of the Wired, Matt, Mobius Striptease, Murray Motorsports, Mysterious Stranger, Number Negative, Oil Drum, Pat, Paul C, Rare Scrungle Spingus 3rd Edition, Source Force, Spectre Cohen, Tortilla Baron, Vivek D, and Wingsman. Our space dogs are A Union Thug, A. Blinken, Akiogo, Ack Guy is Best Guy, Agent Carter, Alice N, Andrew K, Angie, Angry Old Man Yada Yada, Anthony C, Atomic Hobbit, Otto Fox, Baron M, Bat Bay, Ben L, Boomzilla, Brian F, Brian L, C, Cantaloupe Was Taken, Chainsaw Snuggling, Chris K, Cole C, Cat and Lag, CSD 2016, Daddy Bongo, Daniel, Double Time, Dr. Shockmaster, Hank, Aaron, Eric J, Fractal Moonlight, Furious Luddite, George B, Grant K, Griffin, former snow shoveler of Burger King, Heiko S, Howl's Moving Pictures by Rush, Ian R, Ian W, JM M, James A, James C, James H, James T, Jamie K, Jarl Breadmaker, Jerry M, Jedediah D, John C, John Boy D, Jonathan G, Jonathan W, John Tastic 20x6, Juan, Carathago, Delenda S, Kate B, Kate D, Corbin the Dog, Lens White, Lorgath, McLean C, Mar, Martha, Maritza, Mitchell L, Moomin Instrumentality Project, Narrow Ebb, New Name, Nicholas S, Norman W, Northeast Driver, NSFW NSA, Outlook Cub, Panda, PB, Poopbutt, Randall, RBK, Rayto B, Sailor of Fortune, Scott K, Sean H, Central Kazoo, Sean P, Silly Beast, Sparks, Spirit of Thunder, Swanee, The Best Sean, Thomas M, Tim P, Toasty Ken, Trash Do, Therash T, Frisk, Will W, William O, Zachary JB, Zap, Zemo, Zim, and Zombie Dwarf. Albert Count 180. Thank you for listening to another episode of Failure to Launch. If you want to follow us, we are Failure to Launch on Blue Sky and FT Launch Pod on Instagram. We also post our episodes with visual aids at Failure to Launch Podcast on YouTube. FTL intro and outro themes were provided by DJ Danarchy.